Okay, and welcome to Freedom Hustles podcast. This is episode 22. I'm Andy Lehman from Freedom Skills Academy, and today I am with my good friend, John Banks from...
John Banks. Hello, over at sidingcommand.com.
All right, John, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, mate. Yeah, not too bad. Had a bit of a lockdown haircut.
Nice, looking good.
Yeah, had to be done. Well, I'll say me, the missus done it, really.
I would like to have one, but it's sort of non-existent.
You don't have any hair, do you? No, yeah. So, yeah. Other than that, same old, it's a bit like Groundhog Day at the moment, isn't it?
It is, but it's, without going into it too much, it's kind of a bit of a shame, really, that we're still in this Groundhog Day lockdowns and that when you look at other countries like New Zealand, parts of Australia and everywhere else who's managed to control and go back to normality after several months, and we're still, we're actually only just deciding now to stop people coming into the country.
Well, we could talk about that on a whole new. That's a podcast in itself.
That's definitely. So
government policies, but anyway.
So obviously we're not going to talk about that today. So what are we going to discuss today, then, John?
So tonight's we're going to be talking about podcasting versus YouTube channels. So there's obviously they're both kind of a different mediums in their own right, but. I mean, podcasting is fairly new, I guess you could say that. That's a fair enough statement. Now, I've got in front of me now the statistics. There are currently 850,000 podcasts live as of now. I would bet, I haven't got it in front of me, but I would bet that there's a hell of a lot more YouTube channels. But obviously, pros and cons of both. So, we're just going to sort of cover what we think about the two platforms. Certainly for anyone thinking of starting either, what they have to sort of take into account, and so on and so forth. I mean, I know you're obviously, we've done both before. Obviously, this is a podcast in itself, but I know we've both done. I wouldn't say as much. I wouldn't say massively on YouTube, but I know we're certainly fans of YouTube and what it can offer. So we're just going to be talking a little bit about that tonight. Okay.
I mean, podcasting is relatively new, but I mean, I remember dabbling with podcasting. First podcast was probably around 2011 when I started playing around with it, because I don't know if you remember, at that time you could actually link an audio recording to a Facebook post. So I remember. Maybe. I used to record in Audacity.
Yeah, I remember that.
Upload it, because Audacity was a free recording software, and upload it to YouTube. Yeah. So I started playing around with podcasts way back then. I think I remember looking at a product. Was it Sounds to Pounds? It was a product someone was selling about podcasts. And it was in its infancy now, but like you say, it's now really growing. And the great thing about podcasts is basically, as we can see now, it's easy to do. I mean, yes, if you can get some better expensive equipment, but what we do is good enough to share the information that we want to get across, and we can do it from home. The microphone that I'm using is, if I remember right, it was about 50 quid. The microphone, the camera, the webcam that I'm using, which is more for videos. You don't need one of those for podcasts, but that was about 30 quid. The software that we use is free. So podcasting.
What do we use? Just let everyone know.
What do I use? We use for this. If I was doing a podcast which was just basically audio, I'd probably use Audacity, because then I got to strip the audio from the video, which is again free open source software you can get online, and
we host. Where do we host them? On the Anchor, isn't it? Anchor.fm.
Yeah, I mean, the great thing about podcasts is there's many different places. I mean, I can remember there used to be Podbean. That was another place. There was quite a lot of different podcasting places, but now it's getting, because it's getting more popular, you've got things like Apple, you got your Google. If you stick it on Anchor FM, then they distribute it over certain platforms. So you've got Spotify, Google, I think Apple's on there.
Loads of other ones which I've not heard of, but they sort of distribute it out, don't they? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose you can class. I mean, these are more specifically for music, and if you're doing like a radio show, but there's things like SoundCloud and Mixcloud people are putting on, because podcast really generally stands for sort of like audio recording.
Yeah.
But it has become more sort of known as a sort of an informal chat or an interview, hasn't it? Really.
Yeah.
But I mean, so you can do both for this. I mean, we do both. We record the chat as a video, which we put on YouTube, which is great. Going back to YouTube, you can do the audio on YouTube as well, can't you? So basically, you can set up a video with the image. So we're talking about sort of like playing them each off each self, which is better or which is worse. But you can do both, and that's what we tend to do, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the way we do it. But I think what I mean, for the nature of for a podcast perspective, so if you're talking about just a podcast, then obviously for me, I see no reason why you probably, you shouldn't do it this way. And that would be, shoot the visual as well and then upload it to YouTube as well. It's another platform. You might as well do it. We don't push it on there. We just upload it, like we do with the pods. We don't really actively push it. We're not trying to rank for any keywords or anything like that. And most of our chats are kind of informal anyway. But I think from the sort of pros and cons though, if you were going to just start one or the other, you kind of have to think about what it is you're trying to achieve and what your audience wants. I mean, if you're going to become someone that's going to teach design or how to design logos or web design, and you think you're going to start teaching that, maybe a podcast almost certainly there will be an audience for that. But if you're going to teach and you want to kind of do the kind of over the shoulder stuff and explain what you're doing, then obviously YouTube would win.
Anything that's visual.
Anything that's visual and demands attention visually, then obviously YouTube would win. In that sense, because I listen to podcasts almost every day, and I listen to them most of the time when I'm out on a commute. So if I'm either on the bike or if I'm, for me they're an easy listen. I certainly, whenever I go out on the bike, I always listen to a podcast. So in that sense, if someone was describing how they'd done something, this is how I built this website, a podcast probably wouldn't work. So yeah, I for me, it's a very much an easy. It's a sort of, you don't have to really think too much. You can just listen to it. You can absorb what they're doing. It definitely, I do take a lot from them. But for me, they're an easier listen, whereas YouTube demands quite often a lot more attention. There is that side of it.
I mean, like you said, a lot of podcasts, if the things that you're going to teach, you say sort of language, or you want to talk about politics, or you want to talk about anything, even books, reading about books, anything that sort of vocal, sound, mental, which doesn't need visual, then podcasts are absolutely brilliant for that. Like you say, if you're going to do more of a tutorial where you need to be showing people what to do, even if it's like a whiteboard, if it needs to be sort of written and shown, then yes, YouTube videos are probably a lot better. The only other thing I would sort of say that kind of ranks YouTube over podcasts, and I could be wrong here because you probably know statistics better than me, because a lot of people now are using Spotify and Apple and stuff like that. But if you go to Google and do a search for, so let's say that you're doing a podcast or you're building a website and you're getting a brand, and someone goes to Google to search for your brand, chances are that a YouTube video will land in the rankings because they own YouTube.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you wanted to be searched for or found in the search results, YouTube, I'm sure, is probably more a champion than Anchor FM. I can't say I've ever seen Anchor.fm results in a Google search unless I've actually typed for Anchor.fm itself.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's right. I mean, someone can obviously correct us if we're wrong, but in terms of podcast SEO, I don't think it's as relevant or holds much strength as, for example, you can rank YouTube videos now. People are aware of that, and that's dependent on a load of factors. But it's dependent on your title, your brand, your tags, your description, and then obviously other things like how many views it gets straight away, like the first hour and all that. These are all important things, but I don't think that applies to podcasts that much. I mean, I think podcasts generally rely on you promoting them or the sort of discoverability within the platform itself. So you won't find, I don't think, podcasts that are listed on Anchor, you would be able to search for them on Google. I may be wrong, but I think you're right what you said. Yeah.
The other way, I suppose, the work around that is, I mean, I listened to a podcast to do with copywriting by David Garfinkel, and his is the Copywriters Podcast, and he has it on a website, copywriterspodcast.com.
Yes, exactly. That's the other way around it.
So they upload them to, it's actually a specific website system that's been built for podcasting by a guy called Nathan Fraser. But with WordPress, you can upload your audio recording. So you record in Audacity or Zoom, whatever it is. And if it's an audio recording, upload it to your server. And then you take the link, and there are plugins which you can add to your website, especially if it's a WordPress website, drop it in there. And then you can actually host your own podcasts on there, which then makes it a little bit easier to find.
Yeah, definitely. Because then you could write your own. You could embed the podcast, like you've just said then. So you could embed the actual podcast. So if it's on Spotify, you get a shareable, embeddable link.
True. Yeah.
Anyone's on Spotify, you'll see that. You go and click on the side where it says share, and you'll get an embed code. You basically just dump that code into your web page, and that'll pull up that particular episode. And then you could write your own blurb and excerpt, and you could even fill it out and make it into a proper post. That way, then you would be able to rank it, and that would then get more eyes on your. Yeah, so people can make websites and then dedicate that whole website, to the podcast. I mean, I've seen loads of websites. I do it a little bit on my other Side Income Man website where, I put some episodes of this up on a sort of podcast page, if you like. But so that's that. The other thing I think, I mean, you have just touched on it then. For me, I mean, I'm a fan of both. I will say that before we carry on. I think they both serve completely different purposes, and they both have a very important role to play in, content creation, certainly 2021 and beyond. They're both going to be around. But I think that if you're completely new to, the sort of web space, online space, and you want to start one, I would probably say that the podcasting one is a far easier route to go down. Simply because of what, you said now. It might not be so much to shoot a YouTube video. If you're going to do an you could do an over-the-top video and it takes 10 minutes to make it. But that's not where it ends. There's an awful lot of editing and goes involved. You need to make thumbnails. You need to do like a sort of closing page. You need to do a lot of SEO. You need to do some description work, some titles, ranking, and there is a lot of work that can go into the actual overall creation, of a YouTube video, especially, I mean, even some of the ones that we talked about on a previous episode, we were going on about, making videos without showing your face. So they don't become any easier when you do that. Actually, some ways you could say they would probably take longer. If you're going to craft up a half-hour quiz or something like that, that's going to take a lot of hours to edit and make. That is,
it does. Whereas, I can tell you now, I made one not so long back, and it was very simple, as in the fact I used a template, but it was a lot longer than just doing one like this.
Yeah. Whereas, like you say, a podcast. I mean, even if you've got a guest on, I was on one the other week, and the guy that kind of hosted it, they obviously have a format. So they would have drafted up some questions and a sort of, rough idea of how they want the chat to go. But then other than that, it's just a chat and you just record it. Occasionally, you might have a few things that you need to edit out. I mean, we've had it once or twice, but it's nothing usually too drastic.
No.
And then once you've got a intro done, which you can knock up on Fiverr or something like that, you're pretty much good to go. And, like you say, after this, you'll hit stop because we're recording now. The whole thing will get downloaded to your computer. We'll stick it up in the cloud, do probably a half-hour edit, and then that's it. It'll be uploaded.
There's something I did forget to mention as well, is because you was on about for starting, for ease. I mean, there's reasons why you can start a podcast. Is like you say, it's something you can start today. It's basically cheap. You don't really need a lot of equipment for a podcast. It gets out there, and obviously people aren't going to just find it, but over time, if you stick with it, it's good for habits, and eventually it builds up. But with Anchor.fm, you can actually record a podcast with just your phone. They have an app.
Yeah,
so yeah, and they also have a bank of music which you can put behind it. Yes, you'll probably need to get some graphics done on Fiverr, but when we first got introduced to Anchor, we had a bit of a play around, didn't we? We actually recorded some podcasts while walking and talking.
Yeah.
Probably not the most ideal with the, I remember somebody walking past and saying morning to me. I can't remember if that landed in the podcast or not, but if you've got a quiet room and you're just sitting having a cup of tea, you can, pick up your phone and just let it all fall out into the phone, straight onto Anchor, add in your little bit
live, so that's it. Yeah, I don't think there's much editing capability on the phone one. You literally just shoot it raw, don't you, and then just upload.
Yeah. I mean, and the other thing as well is if you start to get a following and you start to, similar to YouTube, once you start to make traction with things like Anchor and places like that, you can actually do sponsored posts. You can be part of we've not experimented with this. We've not really tried it, but every time I upload a podcast to Anchor now, I've got an opportunity to click on a button to monetize it. So obviously they've got an advertising platform where people pay them to have their adverts placed into podcasts, and they will automatically stick it into the recording. Now, if you do that through Anchor.fm, through their microphone, that's fine. But if you do your own podcasting like we're doing now, which we're using Zoom, because we're doing the audio and the video, but if you were to use Audacity and or Zoom itself, because we edit this later on, is that you can add your own advertisement in there. So if you knew somebody who, if you were talking, I don't know, say like you were talking about local, you're in Southampton. So let's say you did a Southampton talk. Every week you did a podcast about Southampton, the area, and you invited local people who are, young bands and whatever's. You could probably contact some of the local businesses and say, right, we've got this podcast. I do it every Friday. It's about Southampton. We've got at least, from what I can see, we're having about 15,000 views each month. Would you be interested in doing a paid sort of sponsorship? The advert will be about 10 seconds long. And so people might pay you to stick an advert in there saying about their pizza or kebab shop or something 100%. Like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point. That's what I was going to go on to next, actually, the sort of monetization methods of both. And for people that don't know, I mean, we'll sort of go back to basics a bit, but obviously YouTube, it's Google owned. So they have their own inbuilt ad platform. It's basically AdSense. So they have their own ad platform. So you can become a partner to that. Once you get up to a certain amount of views, which I think is 4,000 hours, I think you need 1,000 subscribers.
That's right.
So once you hit those two sort of milestones, you can then apply for the ad partnership. So then you can start earning that way. So that way is great. The second way, obviously, is you can talk about your own stuff. So, if you've got a product, a course, a book, a fitness class or anything like that, you can talk about your own. So you can sell yourself on there. And then the other thing is obviously you can put affiliate links in the comment section. So a lot of people on YouTube do stuff, either like product reviews, like Amazon, and you'll see a load of Amazon links. Here's the camera I'm using or whatever. Top 10 lawnmowers, and then they'll link to Amazon and they'll make a commission that way. So that way is fine. In that way, in terms of monetization, is is probably ahead of the podcast game, because the podcast game, like you said, it's probably, you can do the sponsored posts. We haven't really sort of, had a go at that ourselves, but you can do the sponsored posts, which obviously have their own, that'll be in the form of a sort of audio ad, like you hear on the radio and that sort of thing. But you can also do your own. And like you say, if you kind of grow relationships with businesses or with companies, or, quite often I hear podcasts. So like if let's say they've just got a deal with a some sort of accounting software or something like that, the person that's shooting the podcast, he will say today's episode is sponsored by, whatever, to go and get 3 months free or 20% off or something like that, which he's obviously struck a deal up with them. Head over to blah 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 blah.com/my podcast. So they've created a link for him to say on air on the show, on the podcast. If anyone clicks on that link, obviously there'll be a tailor-made landing page or whatever, so they know that he's referred that traffic to them, and then he'll obviously be able to get commissions off of any sales. So that's another way of doing it. And obviously the other way is, your podcast, you can do what you like, so you can sell your own stuff, and as you would on anything else.
Well, that brings me around to, as I mentioned earlier, David Garfinkel's copywriting podcast. He is a well-paid copywriter, and he also has several of his own books. And I don't think they do it every time, now whether it was a special deal or not. But I remember walking one day listening to his podcast, and then suddenly it broke out into his own advert, which had been pre-recorded and dropped into the editing.
Yeah.
And he was actually, I think it was either breakthrough copywriting or advertising headlines which make you rich, one of his books. And it was like, then I was like, oh, obviously, yeah. I mean, you got yourself your own little sort of group of listeners, and they're listening to what you're saying. You got your own products. Obviously, you mention it, you chuck it in there. So it's monetization, as in the fact that you're not necessarily getting paid directly from the podcast itself, but if it results in 2 or 3 book sales, then that's good, there you go. I mean, another
one I used to listen to used to be, and it was really raw, and this shouldn't put people off. I mean, like I say, our setup's by no means professional at all. I'm out in the back office, you're in your office, we've got a couple of mics, doing it over Zoom. Occasionally we have connection issues, very occasionally, obviously, but most of the time it's fine. We just do what you can. I mean, I used to listen to one by Russell Brunson of ClickFunnels, and he used to call it was called Marketing in Your Car. And he used to shoot a pod every commute to work every day. So when he was driving to the office, he'd literally just hit record, and he would just talk about something for about 10 minutes is all his commute was. And I thought they were really good, because they were like, it wouldn't just be a random chat, but you would get the kind of noise in the background. You'd hear him stop at the lights, and he'd be like, oh, come on, mate, hurry up. Do you know what I mean? You'd hear the general talk about stuff, but you'd obviously as well be trying to give a little tip away. And even if he got, not that he would have, because he was a big marketing guy, but even if he got nothing out of it, even if he got 0 views, what was interesting is about, I don't know, after we had loads of these, he must have had, maybe a year's worth, so like over 300 of these podcasts. He packaged all of them up, and he used to sell them. They used to get, I don't know if it was sold or given away, or they were a product anyway, on a USB stick. And he created them, he turned them all into an ebook. So there was that repurpose. He was creating content, even if no one was going to read no one's going to listen to the podcast, which they did. But after that, he had a 365-page book just already made. Basically, he just needed someone to dictate it, and a physical product which he was selling on USBs. I thought it was really neat idea.
And talking about Russell Brunson in his podcast, I think it was in his Traffic Secrets or one of these books. He was talking about his podcast and about setting up. One thing he did sort of talk about is that if you want to set up a podcast, is whatever your niche is, go and approach other people in those niches and try and interview them, because then you can start hijacking their listeners to become your own listeners. But one thing he did say that always reminds me is that he said that you can start today and you can carry on for a few months. You'll probably not see many your podcast might get 1 or 2 listens, 3 or 4 listens. But he says the whole point is not to stop there and then say, oh, nobody's listening, because eventually you get to, which is like, I suppose it's on the snowball effect, the razor's edge. You get to a point where you go to the tipping edge and you snowball down the other side. And he says one day you'll get to a point where you're starting to get listeners, and it might be episode 500 or something. And then once you've got that 1,000 listeners, and if they like what you're listening to, they'll probably go back to your old podcasts, and then you'll start to see them numbers going up. So he says, so I suppose thinking about that, you could actually, if you've written a book and you start a podcast and you're hoping to use that as your advertising platform or one of them, you can put the adverts there in the beginning, first few, because even if, you probably haven't got many listeners at the beginning, people are going to start going back to them. And then eventually you can still end up with people filtering through to your website, to your offers, to other things. But I think the thing that I took from that was the fact that he just basically said, sort of stick with it, because don't expect that you're going to have thousands of people listening straight away, unless of course you start interviewing people who are, with big followers.
Yeah, I think that's the same with YouTube as well. I mean, there is no quick win, I don't think, with YouTube. You really have to stick with YouTube. You have to persevere with YouTube. I've started seeing a little bit of growth now about 8 months after I've listed videos. So just let that be a lesson. Obviously, we'll get the occasional one which comes, straight out of the blocks, but it is rare. The majority of the stuff takes time to kind of bed in. It sort of sits in the sandbox for a few months, and then once it starts getting discovered, and I think that's the same, like you say, podcasts are great. I do all the time. I listen to one that's got like 400 or something episodes, and I literally just grab my phone before I'm about to get on my bike or whatever, and I'll just scroll to a random one. So I might go back to like 128 or something like that, and then just go, boom, let's just listen to that. Like you say, it was probably recorded years ago.
Yeah.
But, all right. Well, we should probably wrap up. Quite an interesting debate that. No real winner, obviously. There shouldn't be. They're both good in what they do. Both have pros and cons. I would say maybe if you're just starting out, you may want to edge towards the sort of podcast route. But don't let that put you off YouTube either, because
it also depends on what you want. I mean, like, our podcasts are just us two chatting. So you could just record that and stick it on YouTube, and do both. Yes, you said, you got a lot of editing to do, but you don't necessarily have to do that. I mean, it does make sense, but if you can do both, do both. Because I mean, it takes no major effort to. I mean, like I said, the David Garfinkel copywriting videos on YouTube are a lot less special as what you do to ours. They just record it, stick an intro on it, boom, on YouTube.
That's it. I mean, like I say, with two of us, we have one each. I mean, I'll do the YouTube stuff, you do the podcast, don't we, at the end?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, that's a great thing. With the two of us, we can split it. But I mean, going back to what we were saying earlier, we're on episode 22 now. We've had 2, possibly 3 weeks where we've missed, mainly because we've been busy on other things, and then there was Christmas.
Yeah.
But we're still plugging away to. I mean, like you say, we could probably get to episode 400-500 before we've got a nice sort of huge following. But we're keeping at it.
Okay. Well, anything else to add?
No. And like I say, I mean, just practice, experiment, give it a go. Like you say, with I believe that you should try and do both together. However, the Anchor.fm with their phone app is just ridiculously easy. That you can do that in the chair, go for a walk, bish bash bosh, and you're done. So give it a try. Okay, well, on that note, as Andy said, give it a go. There's plenty of apps, tools, and things out there that you can use that certainly make this whole thing easier now. Thanks very much for listening. I've been John Banks over at sideincommand.com. I'm Andy Lehman from freedomskillsacademy.com.
Okay, thanks very much.
I'll speak to you soon. Bye bye.